Welcome to Close Your Eyes, Listen to Stories. Close your eyes, relax, and let me take you into the story. Frankenstein begins where the world seems almost emptied of human comfort, in a white northern silence where a ship is caught among sheets of ice and the horizon looks less like a destination than a warning. Before the novel asks what a creature is or what a scientist is, it first asks what ambition feels like when it has traveled too far from home. In the letters of Robert Walton, there is eagerness, loneliness, and that old intoxicating hope that one more mile, one more risk, one more act of daring might reveal what no one else has seen. The frozen sea gives the whole book its frame. It is a place of beauty, but also of extremity, where desire for discovery becomes nearly indistinguishable from desire for self-erasure. Walton calls this voyage noble. He imagines knowledge as a clear light. Yet all around him is a whiteness that blurs edges, swallows direction, and muffles ordinary judgment. Into that suspended world comes a strange sight, a figure crossing the ice at impossible distance, followed later by another man, nearly spent, pursuing what seems half a memory and half a curse. The novel does not hurry. It lets the cold gather around the listener. It lets us notice that the hunger to cross limits is not always cruel at first. Often it begins as longing. Walton longs for friendship, for greatness, for a name that will outlast weather and time. Victor Frankenstein will long for something similar, though in a different language. Both men are drawn not merely to success, but to the feeling of breaking through a barrier that others accepted. The book is gentle enough to understand this temptation and severe enough to show its cost. So the first feeling of Frankenstein is not a scream, but a stillness. It is the hush before consequences speak. In that hush, ambition becomes almost devotional. To go farther north, to learn more deeply, to penetrate the secret places of nature, seems like a kind of faith. Yet the ice around the ship already answers with another truth. Limits are not always insults to human greatness. Sometimes they're the shape of care. Sometimes they're the boundary that keeps wonder from turning into harm. And when Walton welcomes the exhausted stranger aboard, the novel opens its deeper chamber. Here is a man who has crossed his chosen boundary and returned with no triumph to show for it, only grief, warning, and a face weathered by pursuit. The book asks us to listen, as Walton listens, to a story born from the wish to know too much and to answer too little for what that knowledge makes. Victor's early world is not born in darkness, but in warmth, and this matters. Frankenstein comes out of a household shaped by affection, protection, and hope. Geneva is not merely a setting in the book. It is the first image of human order, a place where family, education, and civic life seem capable of sheltering a person from chaos. The tragedy grows sharper because Victor does not begin deprived of love. He begins surrounded by it, which means his later failures cannot be blamed only on fate. They rise from choices made within abundance. As a boy, Victor is drawn toward those older books where hidden powers seem close at hand, where the world appears woven through with secret correspondences. He reads with hunger, not patience. He wants origins, causes, ultimate keys. Even before modern science gives him tools, imagination has already given him a posture. He is not content to admire the world. He wants to enter behind its surface and command the principles there. This is the birth of dangerous imagination. Not imagination as art, but imagination as possession. The novel is subtle about education. It does not simply oppose old superstition to new science. Instead, it shows how a certain kind of mind can turn any system of knowledge into fuel for obsession. A storm flashes over a tree, lightning tears through wood, and suddenly destruction itself becomes a lesson. Nature no longer appears as companion or mystery. It becomes demonstration. Victor's studies in Ingolstadt intensify this movement. Laboratories, instruments, lectures, and anatomical inquiries gather around him like a new language of permission. Yet what he seeks is never merely professional success. He dreams of banishing disease, renewing life, reversing decay, becoming the source of future generations' gratitude. The scale of the dream is almost tender in its first shape. He wants to heal the human condition. But the book notices how quickly compassion can be swallowed by self-enchantment. The desire to relieve suffering shifts into the desire to astonish. The student becomes solitary, fevered, cut off from seasons, letters, meals, and ordinary attachments. Knowledge ceases to be shared inquiry and becomes private assent. This is why Victor's education feels less like enlightenment than incubation. The room narrows. The mind brightens and hardens at once. He does not learn how to live among others more wisely. He learns how to forget them while speaking in a language of human benefit. Frankenstein keeps returning to this danger. The human being who claims to serve life while gradually losing the habits that make life recognizable. By the time Victor reaches toward the principle of animation, imagination has already outrun responsibility. When the act of creation finally arrives, the novel presents it not as triumph, but as a wound opening at the center of the book. Victor has gathered fragments from death, studied decay, labored in secrecy, and poured his youth into the effort to awaken matter. He imagines the moment of success for months, perhaps years. He works under the spell of anticipated glory. Yet when life answers him, the answer is immediate estrangement. The created being opens dull yellow eyes. Breath begins, limbs move, and the maker recoils. That recoil is the moral fracture from which everything else unfolds. Frankenstein is not only about the making of life. It is about the instant when care should begin and does not. The new being is not greeted, named, guided, clothed, or comforted. He is abandoned at the threshold of consciousness. The laboratory scene remains so powerful because it strips away every noble phrase Victor used before. He spoke of benefit, discovery, and conquest over death. But when confronted with the vulnerability he himself has brought into the world, he chooses flight. The room itself seems to turn against him. The candles gutter. Rain presses at the windows. The body he assembled now bears the unbearable fact of relation. It is no longer material or theory. It is someone looking back. Victor cannot endure that gaze because it asks a question he never prepared to answer. Now that you have made me, what do you owe me? In that question lie parenthood, stewardship, ethics, and the plain work of staying present when imagination has become reality. The novel does not need gore to make this moment dreadful. Its terror is relational. Creation without care feels so disturbing because it is recognizable beyond the laboratory. Again and again in human life, people long to begin what they do not wish to maintain. They adore the threshold and evade the aftermath. Mary Shelley turns this pattern into Gothic form. The stitched body is memorable, but the true horror is indifference at first contact, the refusal to remain with what one has called into being. From that night forward, Victor's greatness shrinks. He becomes reactive, secretive, ashamed. He wants the deed without the bond, power without witness, originality without obligation. The whole novel is marked by that first abandonment. Every later death, every pursuit, every echo across mountains and ice seems to rise from this one failure of tenderness. Frankenstein asks us to see that the central wound is not animation itself. It is the absence of love at the moment love becomes most necessary. The being Victor leaves behind enters the world not as a villain, but as a consciousness flooded by sensation. Light hurts, hunger presses, cold surrounds him, sound arrives before meaning. Frankenstein slows down here and becomes almost strangely delicate, attentive to the bewilderment of first experience. The creature feels his way into reality through pain, shelter, warmth, darkness, and the small discoveries by which any life begins to orient itself. Before there's revenge, there's weather. Before there's rage, there's exposure. He wanders through forests and fields with the innocence of one who has no map for human conduct. Fire delights him, then burns him. Berries relieve hunger, then vanish with the season. Water reflects a form he cannot interpret except through unease. The novel gives him no protected infancy. He is born full-grown into a world that reads surfaces instantly. His body announces him before his voice exists. So loneliness arrives earlier than language. He is turned away before he understands what rejection means. This is one of the deepest sadnesses in the book. The creature does not begin by hating humanity. He begins by reaching toward it. He watches cottages, follows sounds of conversation, notices gestures of care, and learns from a distance that people live inside circles of mutual recognition. A hand passed to another, food shared by a hearth, a face softened by familiar affection. These ordinary things become almost sacred to him because they reveal the shape of belonging. He is excluded from them before he can ask to enter. The novel refuses to let violence define him too early. It insists on his responsiveness, intelligence, and capacity for feeling. He gathers wood for strangers in secret. He admires beauty. He grieves without yet knowing what to call grief. In this long awakening, loneliness is not simply the lack of company. It is the pain of existing without a witness who confirms that your suffering and your wonder are real. To be unseen is not only to be alone. It is to become uncertain of your place among living things. So when the creature moves through the natural world, mountains and moonlight do not merely decorate the scene. They become his first companions, vast presences that neither welcome nor reject him. Frankenstein lets us feel how thin the line can be between solitude that nourishes reflection and solitude that starves the heart. A being left untaught will still seek relation. If he cannot find it in human eyes, he will search in firelight, bird song, and the changing sky, carrying within him a tenderness that has not yet found a home. Near the Del Lacey cottage, the novel enters one of its quietest and most piercing regions. Hidden beside a poor household, the creature becomes a listener before he becomes a speaker. Through the cracks of a wall and the rituals of daily life, he learns that language is more than sound. It is the fabric by which human beings weave memory, affection, complaint, hope, and grief into a shared world. The family inside is modest, burdened, and imperfect, yet from the outside their warmth appears almost radiant. Here the book slows into observation. The creature studies how labor moves through a day, how sadness can sit silently with kindness, how music fills a room with something gentler than survival. He begins to imitate the human by attending to its smallest forms. Words gather, meanings settle. He discovers that speech can carry not only requests but interior life. With each lesson, his own mind opens further, and that opening is both a gift and a torment. To know more is to suffer more clearly. The books he finds deep in this ache. History suggests virtue and ambition. Sorrow enters through tales of feeling. Paradise Lost gives him an impossible mirror, half angelic longing and half outcast despair. He reads himself into comparisons that no one should have to bear alone. Literature in Frankenstein is not decoration. It is part of the creature's education in both beauty and exclusion. Books teach him grandeur, but they also teach him what he lacks: lineage, name, kinship, and a place within the human story. What hurts most is that language gives him the power to imagine welcome before he receives it. He does not merely desire food or shelter now. He desires understanding. He wants his inwardness to be met by another inwardness. The cottage becomes a chapel of longing. Each domestic scene to fire, each exchanged glance, each act of patient care enlarges his sense that human society might hold room for him, if only he can approach it correctly, gently, at the right moment. And so, the painful discovery at the center of this segment is not only that people can be cruel, it is that a being may become fully capable of sympathy and still be denied sympathy in return. The more human the creature grows in speech, memory, and moral feeling, the sharper the cut of exclusion becomes. Frankenstein asks whether education alone can save anyone from loneliness. Its answer is sorrowful. Language can reveal the soul, but it cannot force another soul to receive it. By the time rejection turns openly violent, it feels less like a sudden twist than the completion of an atmosphere already gathering around the book. Frankenstein fills villages, homes, and pathways with quick fear at the sight of an unfamiliar body. Doors close. Cries rise. Stones are thrown. The creature learns that society often reacts before judgment, and that the human face can harden into defense with terrible speed. Fear moves through the novel like weather, settling not only over strangers, but over families who love one another and still fail one another. Back in Geneva, grief enters the domestic circle. William's death does not remain an isolated event in the woods. It comes home, sits in mourning rooms, darkens the father's voice, and draws innocent Justine into the machinery of blame. This is one of the book's quiet accusations. Violence does not stay where it begins. It travels inward into households, courts, memories, and prayers. Victor knows more than he says, and his silence becomes another form of abandonment. He cannot protect the innocent because confession would expose his secret authorship. The creature, too, is changing within this atmosphere. Repeated rejection teaches him to interpret every human approach as threat before it becomes one. Compassion, starved long enough, curls into bitterness. Yet the novel does not excuse cruelty simply by explaining it. Instead, it asks us to feel the dreadful reciprocity between social fear and wounded rage. A body marked as monstrous is treated as danger, and under constant exclusion, it begins at last to act within the shape the world has already assigned. This is why Frankenstein remains so unsettling. It does not let ugliness belong only to faces or corpses. It places ugliness in frightened communities, in failed witness, in institutions that prefer easy narratives to difficult truth. The village, the court, the family parlor, the lonely path between homes all become sites where rejection accumulates. The novel suggests that monstrosity is not a stable identity, but an atmosphere produced wherever sympathy breaks down and responsibility is deferred. So the story grows darker without becoming louder. The deaths matter, but just as haunting is the way sorrow settles into familiar rooms. Candles burn near portraits. Parents speak in exhausted tenderness. A servant bows under suspicion. The creature moves beyond the window of belonging and knows he is feared. Frankenstein lets grief collect not on battlefields, but in the intimate spaces where people once expected safety and where the consequences of abandonment become impossible to keep outside. When creator and creation finally speak at length among the mountains, the novel reaches one of its great moral heights. Snowfields, glaciers, and the enormous calm of Mont Blanc surround a conversation about obligation. Nature here is not a refuge from human conflict. It is a stage wide enough to hold questions Victor has tried to shrink into secrecy. The creature does not ask first for pardon. He asks to be heard. His demand is simple and immense. Recognize what you made and answer for it. There is dignity in the demand for companionship. After all the refusals he has endured, the creature does not initially seek a kingdom or revenge without end. He asks for one being who might share his exile, one presence before whom he need not apologize for existing. Frankenstein places this request at the center of its ethics. To create life and then deny it every path to relation is not neutrality. It is a sentence. The book understands companionship as something close to moral oxygen. Victor hears the appeal, and for a time he consents. Yet even his consent is unstable. He imagines consequences, future races of beings, harms to humanity, and the spread of unpredictable life. Some of these fears are not trivial. The novel does not require us to think the second creation is a simple solution, but it exposes Victor's pattern with painful clarity. He returns to the thrill and horror of making, not to the steadier labor of ethical relation. He thinks in absolutes because absolutes help him avoid the ordinary courage of commitment. The half-made companion in the workshop becomes another emblem of responsibility refused. Victor looks upon the materials and destroys them before they can become another living claim upon him. It is a second abandonment, even more deliberate than the first, because now he understands exactly what rejection can do. The creature watches this refusal and sees not prudence, but annihilation of his last hope. The book turns here from plea toward vengeance, yet does so by keeping the moral focus on Victor's broken promise. Frankenstein keeps asking a hard question beneath the drama. What do we owe to those whose dependence we have caused? Victor would prefer that responsibility end where fear begins. The creature knows otherwise. He has learned, through pain, that a life can be destroyed long before it is physically killed, simply by being denied companionship, witness, and future. Under the vast mountain light, creator and creation appear less like opposites than mirrored loneliness, each accusing the other, each revealing what the other cannot bear to see. After the destruction of the second creation, revenge no longer feels distant or symbolic. It enters the rooms where Victor once expected ordinary happiness. Frankenstein becomes especially sorrowful here because its violence passes through domestic thresholds. Letters arrive. Friends wait. Fathers worry. A wedding is prepared. These gestures of home do not protect the characters from tragedy. Instead, they make every coming loss feel more intimate, as if the creature has learned that the deepest injury is not public spectacle, but the corruption of private shelter. Henry Clerval's death matters not only because a beloved friend is gone, but because he represents a gentler form of human relation that Victor repeatedly fails to preserve. Clerval is sociable, curious, alive to languages and people, not merely to abstract conquest. When he is removed from the story, another version of life is removed with him, one that might have balanced Victor's consuming inwardness. The novel quietly suggests that obsession isolates not only the self, but everyone who stands near it. Then comes the wedding night, one of the book's most memorable scenes of dread. The terror moves through corridor, stair, chamber, and candlelight. Victor imagines himself the target, and in doing so, he once again misreads the scale of what has been set in motion. The creature's vengeance strikes where intimacy is supposed to rest. Elizabeth, associated throughout the novel with home, patience, and future belonging, becomes the victim of a conflict she did not create. The bridal room empties into irreversible silence. The horror here is profoundly anti-heroic. There is no battlefield honor, no climactic victory, no cleansing revelation. There's only a house darkened from within. A father bends under grief. A marriage becomes a mausoleum at its first hour. Frankenstein insists that revenge spreads like smoke through domestic space, staining what once seemed safest. The consequences of abandonment return not in abstract justice, but in ruined rooms and broken family continuities. By now, creator and creation are locked together. Yet the novel does not frame that bond as grandeur. It feels exhausted, bitter, and almost airless. Every act has narrowed their world. The creature makes Victor suffer through absence. Victor answers by surrendering the remnants of ordinary life in order to pursue. Neither can step outside the circuit. And so the book turns from home toward wilderness again, carrying with it the memory of extinguished candles, unopened futures, and a tenderness that was never defended when it still could have been. The pursuit that follows stretches across valleys, rivers, snows, and seas until the novel seems to thin into elemental forms. Creator hunts creation, creation lures creator onward, and each becomes the other's atmosphere. By this stage, Frankenstein is no longer concerned with discovery in the youthful sense. It is concerned with the way fixation can hollow a person until only direction remains. Victor lives to follow signs, read traces, endure climate, and imagine the next encounter. His purpose has become as desolate as the landscapes he crosses. Yet the creature is never merely prey. He arranges the chase with a terrible intelligence, leaving food, messages, and glimpses that sustain pursuit while deepening torment. It is as if he refuses Victor the mercy of conclusion. The creator who once fled from relation must now remain bound to the being he made, step after step, sleepless mile after mile. The chase is punishment, but it is also parody. Victor finally gives his creation total attention, only when that attention can no longer heal anything. In this long passage through the world, The two figures begin to resemble each other more and more. Both are isolated from ordinary society. Both are sustained by obsession. Both read nature through suffering. The Alps, the seas, the northern wastes, all become mirrors rather than escapes. Vastness does not free them. It enlarges their inward desolation. Frankenstein understands that enmity can create a likeness as intimate as love. To pursue another person for years is to let that person shape your inner weather. And still the novel resists, turning the pursuit into pure adventure. It keeps the listener aware of what has been lost. Every mile northward carries the absence of family, friendship, rest, and trust. Walton's ship receives Victor at the end of this motion, and the frame closes with painful precision. Another ambitious seeker encounters the wreck of ambition personified. The warning is no longer theoretical. It has a body, a voice, and a history of wasted devotion. So the chase across frozen spaces becomes the final education of the book. Knowledge pursued without responsibility leads not to mastery, but to mirroring. Victor and the creature circle each other until each seems almost generated by the other's wound. The creator cannot escape what he has made, and the created cannot escape the need to be answered by the one who made him. In the widening distance of the north, they become two shadows cast by the same original refusal of care. At the end of Frankenstein, the noise of ambition gives way to a strange and solemn quiet. Walton listens as Victor fades, and the old language of glory sounds thinner now, almost embarrassed before death. The novel does not close by solving its questions. It closes by letting their cost remain visible. Victor still speaks of purpose, destiny, and perseverance, but his body tells another story. Exhaustion, grief, and the terrible smallness of a human being who wanted to command life and instead scattered suffering through every bond he touched. Then the creature appears once more, not as a victorious monster, but as a mourner over the dead man who made and failed him. This final scene is one of the book's deepest acts of complexity. The being who inspired fear enters in grief. He does not undo what he has done. He does not become innocent, but he reminds the listener that vengeance has not relieved his loneliness. It has only burned through what remained of meaning. Hatred kept him tied to Victor. With Victor gone, even hatred begins to lose its structure. Frankenstein ends, then, in silence after responsibility has been abandoned too many times to recover. The ship, the ice, the dim firelight, the immense cold. All the first images return, but gentler now, as though the world itself were absorbing the story back into stillness. Walton can choose to turn homeward. That choice matters. It suggests that limits may yet be honored, that warning may yet be heard by someone before obsession consumes him. The novel offers no cheerful comfort, but it does offer the possibility that listening to ruin might prevent another repetition of it. What lingers most is not the laboratory shock or the chase, but the human need to be seen. Victor wanted nature to acknowledge his genius. The creature wanted a face that could meet his own without terror. Walton wanted a companion equal to his longing. Each of them reached into emptiness for recognition. The tragedy is that they sought it while misunderstanding the humble forms it requires: presence, honesty, patience, care, and the courage to remain answerable. So the book recedes into the Arctic dark with a tenderness harsher than condemnation. It tells us that knowledge without responsibility grows lonely, that abandonment multiplies, and that what is made in isolation may return asking for love in a voice no one prepared to hear. The final image is not only of a being drifting into cold distance. It is of ambition after its fever has passed, leaving behind the quiet truth it refused from the beginning. To create is to enter a bond, and to deny that bond is to make a wilderness of the heart. And that's where this story comes to a rest. Close your eyes, carry this story with you, and slowly drift off to sleep. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to Close Your Eyes, Listen to Stories. There's always a new story waiting for you here. Sweet dreams.